You know, there are some points within our lives where we will inevitably receive our very own acid tests. Essentially, these are the trials that we experience when we are at a very vulnerable and compromising state, both during our highest highs and our lowest lows. The tests to measure our vigilance and ignorance despite the luxuries we experienced when we are well up the ladder in life, and the tests to measure our resilience and perseverance despite the bleakness of our circumstances when we are still in the rut of life or when we do fall from grace. This is what we will all encounter during our individual self-improvement journeys. Our extent to resist indulging in the onslaught of temptations and gratifications after an extensive period of time of personal growth and abstinence, and our extent to wanting to redeem ourselves when we do slip away, while at the same time getting overwhelmed with disappointments and regretful actions, the latter of which is exactly what falling off from your self-improvement journey feels like. You know, the lustful urges to undergo a nuclear ejaculation after months of not wanking your dick off and then having to dwell in your own failure after voluntarily giving into your impulses towards the thing that you initially sought to destroy forever, and the cravings to quench our desire for all the palates of taste within processed foods after months of undergoing body recomposition through lifting weights and eating clean but bland organic foods, and then having to withstand our never-ending compulsion to consume more of the devil's fruits once we've tasted them after a long while. The reason we fall off from our self-improvement journey is simple. We unconsciously become too comfortable for our own good. We put ourselves in delightfully comfortable positions for way more and longer than necessary, and we forgot to keep ourselves mindful of the circumstances surrounding us. Like, for example, mindlessly and incautiously scrolling through Instagram and encountering pictures and reels of hot women, getting invested for too much and too long into that shit, and then finding yourselves rock hard and eventually touching yourself because your testosterone level is through the roof after long periods of retention. Now, it is normal to want to reward ourselves after all the time and work that we've put in to cultivate ourselves into a position or state where we initially never thought was possible. However, we're humans. We always will gravitate more towards pleasure rather than pain, and it's no different when it comes to self-improvement. Our elevated sense of self-worth that is cultivated through self-improvement can turn on us should we decide to underestimate the extent to which it can blind us from the seductive dark forces of temptations, until eventually we are too late to realize that we've regressed far back to where we started, or because of the snowball effect of one ignorant decision or choice. And the worst part is, the psychosis and superstitious extent of our disappointments and remorse on ourselves for our own misconduct and failure will tempt us even further to bask ourselves deeper in all the gratifications that we initially want to avoid, especially when it comes to the endeavors that we spend a lot of time and effort working on, like retention and diet. The moment where your mind says, "Fuck, what have I done? Can't believe I just did that. I'm such a failure, man." Or any other sorts, is the moment where your fall from grace begins. Because it's instinctual for us to seek any form of means, usually pleasure, to numb or get rid of the painful feeling that we are suffering from. The greater the pain and agony, the more we will be tempted to want to eliminate it as soon as possible by any means necessary. That is why you find yourself engaging in a train of masturbation after relapsing on your year-long retention streak that caused you to experience a cataclysmic level of self-accusation and self-condemnation like you've never experienced before. That is why you find yourself stuffing your mouth with candies, donuts, and ice creams after you realize that you've consumed more cheat meals and junk foods than you actually should or initially planned on consuming, that eventually caused you to spiral into an emotional whirlwind in despising your own abilities and self-imposed ethics. It's that extreme feeling of revulsion and repentance towards ourselves that got us to experience our steep and deep fall from grace that eventually leave us in the pool of our own tears and the ridicule of those gratifications that we ended up consuming more of. Rewards and gratifications are infinitely and endlessly seductive. They're pretty much like a hot woman in a lingerie persuading you to come to bed and bang all day long. And the moment you want to get up and go to work, it pulls you back into bed, gives a nice stroke on your dick, and you ended up emptying your tank before the day even started, and eventually doing nothing and going nowhere for the entire day, week, month, or year. This is especially important to take note of, specifically when you are well up the ladder in your self-improvement journey and where all the temptations are pretty much at your disposal for you to relish in. You must maintain a relatively high level of self-awareness when it comes to reaping your rewards, because one overstepped slip can get you caught up in a seemingly comfortable but consequential downward spiral. And this can happen in professional circumstances as well, where you got too comfortable and arrogant in your own way that the quality or output of your work eventually cease or drop. One way to develop self-awareness is to become utterly self-critical, constantly identifying or pointing out your strengths and weaknesses, your tendencies and vulnerabilities without your fragile ego getting in the way of you being brutally honest with yourselves. The moment you feel like you are slacking or hesitating to put yourself even in a slightly uncomfortable position is the moment you must put yourself in an uncomfortable position, or at least a position where you aren't unwinding or loosening up in order to activate your sympathetic nervous system. For example, if one afternoon you look at the time and you make a mental note to yourself to go to the gym in 2 hours, but then suddenly out of nowhere you start to feel somewhat doubtful, uncertain, or reluctant to go. Like, should I go to the gym? Should I just skip this one session? It won't make much of a difference, would it? I'm already chill right now and I don't think I want to get away from this. That is the moment you must effectively immediately go to the gym, or at least take a walk, or do an endeavor that engages your alertness and vigilance. Same thing with regards to retention. The moment your dick tells you, man, I'm so fucking horny, it'd be really sweet if Tanisha and Tatiana were here, and then you find yourself start humping your own pillow, is the moment you should immediately do 200 push-ups or submerge yourself in an ice bath or do anything that gets you to become alert and not feeling relaxed or complacent. I personally did the same thing in terms of diet as well. At night, often I get cravings for sugar, and what I did to signal the ghrelin hormone to stop telling me that I am hungry is I chugged 2 full beer mugs of water just to make me feel full, and quite a bit nauseous, I'll have to admit. Bad habits are a lot easier to develop than good habits. That is why they are a lot harder to unlearn or withheld, because a lot of bad habits are natural animalistic impulses for us human beings. As for those of us who do slip off the ladder and then ended up completely at rock bottom, or at least significantly far off from where we've fallen from, this is where, at least personally, the real acid tests are going to be imposed onto our will, possibly more than ever before. Because the realization that we've basically tripped onto a landslide and regressed far back into the position where we first started is certainly not an easy feat to withstand. It's agonizing, heartbreaking, and morally damaging all at the same time, and this is the part where I've mentioned that you engaging in a seemingly unbreakable sequence of indulgence in pleasures and gratifications in order to desperately numb or get rid of the agony will occur. Because imagine experiencing the disappointment of your own failure coupled with realizing that you have to do all the hard things all over again from the start and experience all the pain all over again. Like if you're on a year-long quest to abstain from ejaculation and then completely relapsing on the last day of the year, wouldn't you be disappointed in yourself initially? All the willpower you have to muster up to resist your natural impulses, and all the work you've done to get you to that point in your goal, only to have all of them slip away at the last moment. It's pretty soul-crushing initially, if I'm going to be honest. However, good news for you, realistically, it's only your mythical, spiritual, and superstitious attachment to them that got you to think and feel that way. Like if you didn't go to the gym for 2 weeks, simply pick up where you left off. It's that simple, because you haven't fallen that far off, and if you didn't go to the gym for 3 or 4 months and then having to start all over again, all of your precious work will not be in vain. Sure, it will be as painful as when you first started, but your progress towards the stage or level that you left off will be much faster and easier than when you first started because of muscle memory. And this not only apply to your body but your brain as well. Like if you've learned and polished a skill and then having to forego that skill for a long while, yeah, you will initially be a little trippy, rusty, and clumsy, but you've done this many times beforehand, so it won't take that long to get yourself back into the rhythm of where you left off, because your brain has already been periodically predisposed to that particular circumstance and stimulus. All you need to make sure is that you must not enter that morally self-deprecative state where you engage in those stupid, unnecessary, and mentally damaging negative conversations about yourselves that does nothing but get you to underappreciate your efforts and denounce your own potential. The road to redemption always begins with a reignited and deadlier form of determination, not with a darkened and lackluster form of disapproval over one's own capabilities that has already been proven significantly. And if you need to find the motivation to do them all over again, remind yourself of all the reasons why you started doing them all. It may sound cliche, but take a moment to bring those reasons back into clarity and impose them back into the forefront of your mind. And if you find yourself thinking, oh, what's the point? I failed when I tried my hardest. Why should I bother trying again? Well, this time, when you do try, treat those temptations as your nemesis. Compile bad narratives about them and make them utterly noticeable to you on a daily basis, like posting notes about them on a wall beside or in front of your workplace. Because when you acknowledge that you have mortal enemies, they could push you beyond the norm of sanity. You will be sharper and more focused than ever before, as losing or conceding to your enemies means that your dignity is as frail and worthless as your enemies mocked it to be. And no man in this world wants to have his dignity being utterly shamed in front of his beloved peers, especially to those who believed in him. What we need to constantly remind ourselves is this, gentlemen. Self-improvement in and of itself thoroughly is not exactly a delightful term where we usually associate it with feeling good about ourselves through experiencing growth. That happens after self-improvement. Self-improvement is a process of basically going through vast arrays of discomfort in order to unlock and cultivate the necessary attributes that we want to eventually possess and utilize to our advantage. The word improvement or development does not come or is not achieved from moments and circumstances of solace. It comes from moments and circumstances of struggle and resistance. Improvement or development does not happen and will not happen within comfort and luxury because there are no circumstances to comprehend, adapt, and overcome. Only circumstances to relish, benefit, and appreciate. Self-improvement is all about constantly putting ourselves in uncomfortable positions. It's a lifelong quest. It's not a momentary phenomenon to eventually cease in doing and then reaping all the seemingly infinite rewards without taking into account the consequences that comes after it. Comfort breeds complacency. Complacency breeds ignorance. Ignorance breeds carelessness and stupidity. Thank you for watching.